Good evening, everyone. Good to see everybody here. I have these countdowns that play as I get this class started, and it just occurred to me I'm probably missing an opportunity to do, I don't know, like Muzak, like elevator music. There's some other things I can do, like when I start class and first show up on screen, I can um, I can add some other sound effects to it. But yeah, I probably won't do that too much. Anyway, let me get over here to my slide screen. There we go. All right, so I typed the link out just in case anyone wants to click it. So if you look at the comments here in the Facebook video, if you would like to get text message reminders of when Wednesday night class is going to go live, and also a little info about what we'll do that night, I would be glad to have you click that link or go to rmd.at/KC midweek. And using Remind app, you can get notifications there. Crystal, that's a possibility. Yeah, I can do that. I can do some weird stuff too. I probably don't need to delve too deeply into that, but anyway, yeah, I could have too much fun with that stuff if I let myself go. But all right, well, good to have everybody here. And as we get started, I decided to title tonight's class "Fighting a Good Fight." The implication of this being that it's not intrinsically bad, wrong, or anything to have disagreements with your spouse, and sometimes even to discuss them in a high-spirited fashion. According to what I've studied, what's more important than how many or how few fights you have is much more like, how do you end your fights? So when you're having a disagreement or an argument, do you end by turning toward each other, or do you end by turning away from each other? And I started off with the intention of talking more about fighting, and where I kind of ended up with tonight's class, I think the best way to make fighting go more smoothly is to start with a good offense, right? Like to start off by really trying to bond well and connect well, so that when you need to talk, you've got a solid foundation to work that out on. So I am going to talk a little bit about some thoughts for how to try and fight in ways that aren't destructive. But I am going to spend some time tonight looking at some things that I hope would lay a good groundwork so that fighting doesn't have to get too bad as it goes. So we'll see how we do. Let's talk about bids for connection. Whether you are in the middle of an argument or just in general, one of the things that happens a lot in healthy relationships is that you see one partner pretty often reaching out to the other partner for a positive type of connection. So there's a tendency for people to sort of feel like maybe their relationship is inferior because they haven't been able to take like an amazing trip overseas, or they can't do like the big grand gestures at great expense, or there's kind of that feeling that we have to do something huge and majestic. Not that those things are bad, but if you look at the relationships that are healthiest, that will last, until death do us part, for decades, where the couple just truly grows together, they say a lot of what makes that relationship work so well to the outsider would be pretty boring to watch. It's the kind of thing where two people are sitting on the couch and one says to the other, "Oh, check this out. I just saw this in this book," or "I saw this in this paper. Look at this. I think you would like this." Just a simple little bid for your attention and a little way of saying, "Hey, I want to kind of include you in my life." Bids for connection are super healthy. We should look for any opportunity to do that. I've discovered over time, this is something that my dad was pretty good at, actually. My dad, over the years, anytime he could figure out something that I was interested in or my sister was interested in, it's like he'll just continue to send me little bits of information. So if it's a rock group I was telling him about, I'm a big music enthusiast, or some kind of guitar I was interested in, or a guitar show coming to town, Dad would clip stuff out of the newspaper, or he would shoot me little emails. At this point, he sends me text messages, and I do the same for him. But, these days, a lot of the musicians we like are all passing away. They're all getting older. And so we'll send each other information about, "Oh no, did you see what happened to this guy?" But just the same, those little bids for connection are something that lead to a healthy relationship. I'm interested if you could share, are there any ways that you actively sort of bid for your partner's attention? And again, as I word that, I don't know if that's the best way to word that question. It's not, I'm not implying anything about like I'm desperate trying to get their attention. Like, how do you kind of bid to make a connection with your partner? What are some things that have worked well for you? What has that looked like in your relationship where either you're kind of reaching out to your partner or your partner is kind of reaching out to you? Interested in hearing what has worked for you, but as I talk about an ability to, we definitely, Cheryl, we did definitely talk about Eddie Van Halen, and boy, it's been a rough few years lately. A lot of good people, a lot of good musicians have passed away. So I'm interested in hearing from you, kind of how you bid for your partner's attention. I wanted to share a couple of scriptures. So here's a relationship gone bad. This is God talking about Jerusalem. I believe much of what you could say about God's relationship that has soured with Jerusalem, you could get some cautionary warnings about what your relationships should or should not look like. Listen to this from Zephaniah. Woe to the city of oppressors, rebellious and defiled. She obeys no one. She accepts no correction. She does not trust in the Lord. She does not draw near to her God. Oh, that's a good comment. Thank you, Gene and Sharon. Sharon says, "Earth to Gene." Gene, get out of your head and pay attention to me. That's one way to do it. Yeah, I ask questions about what my husband is doing at work or what he's reading. That's a great place to start because, Cheryl, that's the world that he's living in. The world of ideas or the workplace. And yeah, knowing what's going on in his head and in his life is a great way to reach out for a connection, but also to really understand what it's like to be him. So great on both of those accounts. This passage is interesting to me because just the way, especially the way it ends, this is a person who accepts no correction, which is a way of saying there is no influence happening here. So I don't think it's necessarily the case that I would expect like one spouse to obey another spouse. That's kind of different language than I would employ. When it comes to me and God, I think I should obey God. I don't think my wife should necessarily, like, obedience is not a word I would like to invoke very much. But there's something to be said for having influence over your spouse, where I could make a case for something I think is important and she might change her course of action based on my thoughts and feelings. It should absolutely be the case that if my wife has strong opinions, great concern, some insight, I should be willing to hear that and possibly change my course of action based on what it is that she tells me. And I would say in my own relationship, that's been a real positive for me over the years. There are several things that I've accomplished that I'm very proud of that had my wife not kind of kicked me in the rear end a few times and said, "Hey, do it, you can do it," I probably wouldn't have done those things. So thinking about someone who accepts no input, that's a bad picture. Does not trust the Lord. If trust is gone, where you just don't assume good things about each other. And then there's the lack of connections. She does not draw near to her God. If we aren't trying to draw close to each other, it paints a pretty bad picture for where things are going. I believe those bids for connection are really crucial to so many things about relational health. Here's a passage that's a little more positive. Submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. That's nice to know. Come near to God, and he will come near to you. You draw close to God, God draws close to you. And in fact, I would probably want to add on to James's thoughts, some of John's thoughts, that we love God because he first loved us. When we draw near to God, we're not initiating it. We're really responding to what he's already done. But just the same, whatever day you decide to turn a new page, make a fresh start, draw close to God, God stands ready to do the very same. And that's an encouraging thing to know. Oh, this is interesting. Thank you, Sandy. Now that Dan is no longer able to speak to me, we connect first thing in the morning by me reading to him. Well, that's a very special thing to be able to do. We've been reading the Bible together and also the Chronicles of Narnia. And boy, you can't go wrong with either of those options, Sandy. Chronicles of Narnia, to me, it's interesting. Do you read them in like the traditional order, or do you read them in like the chronological order of their stories? I think what is it, The Magician's Nephew? That would be, I guess, technically the first, even though it wasn't the first written. Great stories, but yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, there you go. We could be reading on our own, and he or I say, "I'm going to get a snack. Do you want or need something?" Yeah, that's a very simple bid for connection. And getting to know Ron, Linda, I have never known anyone who had quite the sweet tooth for chocolate that guy's got. So you got to watch your candy dish when he's around, because he will go for it. So I'm guessing if you're getting something sweet, Ron is going to almost always be up for that. But yeah, good for you for making that bid for connection. All right, so those are a couple of verses to think about as we go. We miss those bids sometimes. Our partner reaches out, our partner does something to help us connect. So why is it that sometimes we might miss those bids for connection? Sometimes this will be because they are wrapped in a negative emotion. So what's really happening is that I'm kind of hurting because I want to connect with you, but because I'm feeling hurt, I'm expressing it in a way that maybe sounds angry or critical, and it might be easy to miss the bit in the middle of that. So an example would be, in the evening, "Oh, you're working on emails now when you had all day and you could have done that? Why won't you just come to bed?" If you really look at what's being said there, it's a desire to connect. It's actually a positive connection that's desired, but because it's wrapped in some of the negative emotions of the circumstances, it might be a little harder to notice, oh, this person is actually trying to connect with me. Secondly, we are too distracted by the wired, and I guess I should say the wireless world. This was an interesting quote to me, that mindlessness more than malice can lead us to ignore each other's needs. I think it's very rarely the case. Certainly, it's a bad case if you've got one spouse actually actively feeling malice for the other. But isn't it the case more often that we are just simply distracted by things? That maybe we just don't have any zones in our house where we're not going to bring along the smartphone or the tablet or the laptop, and it's like there's just no safe zones. I really. Not everyone is in a living situation where they have the luxury of extra space, but people I know who have the ability to work from home, I've gotten in the habit of strongly encouraging, at least like in premarital counseling, I will strongly encourage people not to keep their work computer in their bedroom. Like, you've got to have some zones in your house that are, like the bedroom should be primarily for resting, for connecting with each other, but not for doing work, because it's always there, it's always nagging at you, and it's always a ready distraction. But we are easily distracted by what's going on, and your partner might come along and try to offer some sort of connection or tell you something interesting, and it's easy to be so absorbed in whatever notifications you're clicking through that you just miss it entirely. So I very much do advocate for keep some spaces in your house where the technology is more off limits. And for me, that I don't succeed a lot of the time, but like Tuesdays are my days off. Since Sunday is definitely a work day for me, I take Tuesday as my second day off of the week, and a lot of things I like about that. But I've had to get in the habit of basically leaving my phone on the other end of the house, because if it's with me, I will inevitably start working on stuff. Or responding to stuff. And, very rarely is it the case that something couldn't have waited one more day. But yeah, you got to have some spaces in your house, some spaces in your schedule where those digital distractions are gone. And hopefully we're in a good enough headspace that we don't always just wrap our bids in those negative emotions. But those can be challenging. Yeah, what's even, to me, the bigger conundrum in these circumstances, Sandy, is like we're in a restaurant, people have their faces on their phone, but sometimes they're actually like texting each other. So it's an interesting world that we're living in now. This is actually pretty generous, Randall. I like this quote. "Never attribute to malice anything that could be adequately explained by ignorance." I try to tell people that occasionally, when you're in a vocation like mine where I do so much speaking and teaching, sometimes I just get misheard, misunderstood based on what a person's going through in life. They take something away that I didn't intend it, And I try to tell people something like that pretty often. Like I can guarantee you, I have never in a sermon singled anyone out in the crowd intentionally. I have never deliberately tried to just be mean-spirited to anyone. So yeah, if it feels that way, talk to me about how I can avoid that in the future, but please don't assume I was trying to. Yeah, so it is my ignorance, probably more than my malice, if I even have any, that would drive that. Yeah, that's a good quote. I like that. Thank you for sharing that. So those are a couple of things that could cause us to miss those opportunities for connection. One good thing to try, kind of like what Cheryl was saying, is to try to make it your goal to have at least half an hour a day where you're just doing the simple conversation, how was your day? And by connecting like this proactively, it has the effect of reducing each other's stress. So rather than me just kind of cramming everything inside of me until finally I reach my limit and then I blow up and have to tell you how my day was because I just can't keep it all in, by actively seeking out that question of how was your day? What's been going on? There's a lot of ways that can kind of help. It just provides a proactive opportunity to vent and to de-stress and hopefully to make argumentation less necessary. As you have that basic conversation about what was your day like, here's a few tips about that. Important to take turns. It doesn't need to be just one-sided, and I know some of us are less verbal than others, but just because you're a nonverbal person doesn't mean your spouse doesn't still need to know what's going on in your head, and they won't know unless you tell them. So take turns. Both of you need to talk. Try to show genuine interest. A hard one for us guys especially, don't give unsolicited advice. There may be times that this is a conversation where you're asking me to help you figure out a solution to a problem. Sometimes it might be a conversation where you just want to talk about how things felt and what you did and just feel a little bit validated for what you were feeling or how you handled it. And you don't need a solution. And so if we're too quick to jump into, well, here's what you need to do about that, then, it might not feel like we actually got heard. And sometimes it can feel a bit insulting. Like, you don't think I'm capable of figuring out some solutions to my own problems. You don't think I'm capable of working through this. I just am trying to share with you what my life is like right now. Important to communicate your understanding. Make sure they know that you're hearing them. As much as possible, take your partner's side. It's really demoralizing to be talking to the person you're counting on in life to really truly be in your corner, and they're always trying to play the devil's advocate with you and siding with the person you have a problem with. Boy, that is not endearing in the moment. Helpful to express a we against others attitude. Treat each other as if you're a unit. We're in this together. I'm rooting for you. I'm in your corner. I believe in you. I want the best for you. Showing affection, also validating emotions in that conversation. How was your day? What's going on in your life? A lot of days that conversation might not be that eventful, but it is helpful if you can make it a real conversation. Some couples can get into this routine where they're trying so hard to avoid fighting that they don't ever actually open up that much. So the conversation would go, well, how was your day? It was all right. How about yours? Oh, nothing too much. Okay. Well, dinner's on the table. That's just like, there's not really anything being exchanged. You want to go deeper than that, but you do that at the risk of occasionally having a disagreement or not seeing something the same way or having to spend more time fleshing something out. But that is the stuff that good relationships are made of. So don't shy away from that. In receiving a positive bid, I wanted to share some insights that I gained from some resources on positive psychology. I found this chart both helpful, in some ways, if I'm honest, a bit demoralizing, because of all the ways you could receive a bid, 3 of these 4 ways are actually negative, like would lead to things being worse instead of being better. But I want you to notice on, let's see, I don't know, can you see my, okay, I think, yeah, you can see my arrow there. So as you notice on the left side, you've got passive and you've got active. you've got someone who tends to refrain, you got someone who's more proactive. On the bottom, you've got destructive, something that's kind of harmful or hurtful, and something that's constructive. There's different ways these blend together. So some of the labels I've seen applied to these, let's look at an approach. So someone makes a bid to connect with you. So let's say the wife comes home and she's got news. Timmy just made the basketball team. All right. So Timmy's made the basketball team. She comes home and tells her husband. A husband who takes an active, destructive view would be kind of aggressive in responding, but very negative. Oh, great. We've got the basketball team now. So how are we going to fit all this in our schedule? How are we going to come up with a budget for this? Blah, 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 you know, and so that's what you would call a joy thief. So an active, destructive approach to a connection bid. That's the work of a joy thief. Now, to me, the most comical of these is the passive destructive, which is someone who is negative but is not really not engaging that much. So wife comes home and says, Timmy made the basketball team, and the husband said, well, so let me tell you what I was working on today, and blah, blah, blah. You know, just completely changes the topic, moves on, shows no interest. This would be a conversation hijacker. So whatever it is I was trying to talk to you about, suddenly it's gone a different direction, and it's as if I never said anything. So that's passive destructive. There is also passive constructive. This is what you would call the conversation killer. Stereotypically, this would be wife comes home, good news about Timmy making the team, and husband's looking on the phone, says, oh, great, yeah, that's good. And she might come back 10 minutes later and he says, oh, let's talk a little more about that. But 10 minutes later, the emotional high's gone. She's no longer interested in sharing. Like there's something about knowing in the moment when to respond well that makes a difference. So what are we going for? We are going for an active, constructive response. When our spouse offers to connect with us, we want to try and engage and to do it in a positive and appreciative way. And so this is what they would call the joy multiplier role. So your spouse comes home, good news about Timmy, he made the basketball team. Then the response ought to be, that's so fantastic, sets the phone down. I'm so glad to hear this. Man, Timmy must have worked so hard to make the team. So, Timmy, I want you to tell me all about it. How did you find out about it? Who was with you when you got the news? How did it make you feel? What do you think helped you to get to make the team? How did you achieve this? Wow, you should feel really good about that. But you want to take something that's a good thing and try and enhance it and build on it. So again, of all the ways you could respond to a positive effort at a connection, 3 of those ways have an overall kind of negative effect. So important as much as we can to try and be active and constructive in how we receive connections from our partner to multiply the joy in our relationship. So where there is already a good thing, let's make it the best thing we possibly can, and that's a healthy approach. So wanted to share that with you. I found that grid helpful, and again, the conversation hijacker, the person who responds to good news by just changing the topic. Boy, what a drain that is. All right, so here's what I would hope we can say much of the time. If you were to describe, like, what am I like in a relationship? I would love it if it were true that you could say this about me. When you are in pain, the world stops and I listen. Why is that so important? Several reasons, one of which has to be that where there is pain, where there is disappointment, there is a lot more potential for conflict. Remember, we're trying to talk some today about fighting a good fight. If we're going to have a disagreement or an argument, let's try to avoid it if we can, but if it needs to happen, let's push for a positive outcome and a positive connection. But if you want to make your arguments worse, then when your partner is hurting, draw back, ignore them, tell them to quit being emotional, whatever that is. But this is a good philosophy. When you are in pain, the world stops and I listen. That's a good approach in general to this. I am just curious, what questions have helped you strengthen your relationships? I know we had a couple of people share, well, hey, like maybe I'm going to get up and make a snack and I say, would you like something? Or I ask, what's going on at work? What are you reading about right now? What are you interested in right now? What are some other good questions that you think people should be asking in their relationships? And I would say, especially when you see your partner hurting, what are some good ways to talk to them about it? Hey, I see something going on. Tell me more. What do you need from me right now? And the answer may just be I need some space, and that's fine. But what are questions that have helped you strengthen your relationships? Interested in hearing from you. A couple of tips on this. When you are listening to pain or crying, stereotypically, it is the guy who will get very uncomfortable if the female is crying as they're talking. I know that's a stereotype. I don't think that's always how that works out. But when there is pain or crying, here's some things to do. First of all, ask what's missing. Okay, right now you are feeling some hole in your life somewhere. Something has robbed your joy from you. What's missing right now? What are you lacking? What is making you feel hurting and incomplete? What's causing the pain? What's making you feel like you have to cry? So ask about what's missing. That's one way to put it. Secondly, don't try to minimize it or just tell them to cheer up. In fact, especially if you know anyone who suffers from depression, especially clinical depression, it really is an illness. And like the worst thing you could say to a person who feels depressed is, well, try to cheer up. It's like, don't you think if I could, I would? It's not that simple. But when someone's going through a genuine hard time, I think this is also important for parenting. This was something that I noticed a lot when I was in youth ministry, is that when your teenager is going through something that is traumatic and difficult for them, it doesn't help them at all for you to tell them it's just not a big deal and they should get over it. First time I really thought about this from a different angle, our son was like 2 weeks old and something really minor happened to him and he had an absolute meltdown, big puppy dog tears, screaming, crying. And it occurred to me, he's only been in this world for 2 weeks. And despite the fact that this is nothing, this is actually the worst thing that's ever happened to him. Right? So maybe it was falling backwards on the bed and landing on the pillow, which he didn't know anything about falling backwards. It scared him to death. It could be something really minor where it'd be so easy to just dismiss how a person feels. But that changes a little as your children get older and capable of more. But be really careful when you're handling another person who is feeling wounded or lacking in something about just minimizing their source of pain. It doesn't help to try and just pretend that nothing's wrong. So don't just tell them to forget about it or cheer up. Also, don't take everything personally. So here's something, someone may prove me wrong on this, but I'll tell you, in church work, I've been in ministry since 2004, so 16, 17 years, whatever that is. I will say it is now the case that I have been chewed out on several occasions by people over the years, right? Like it does happen sometimes. I will say that as I've learned more about situations where I got chewed out, to date, 100% of those conversations, the issue I was getting yelled at about was not even the real issue that was bothering them. That's something I've tried to hang on to now. A lot of times people are just feeling a lot of internal pressure, and the first time they find something that looks like a relief valve, they just come gushing. So it might be something really small that people latch onto and get frustrated about. And even with your spouse, like all of a sudden they are just what you would say is irrationally angry about something that's like, how is that big of a deal? Well, the thing to do is to actually try to keep yourself calm. Don't take it too personally and say, well, what's really going on here? A lot of times the issue isn't the actual issue. It may just be a venting point for the bigger thing. But that has been my experience. I very seldom see people get really angry about the thing they say they're angry about. A lot of times this is an excuse to deal with a bunch of negative emotions that something else is causing. So take the time to dig deeper and to learn more about your spouse. Don't immediately take it personally. Also, search out the goal and the obstacle. Okay, so something's frustrating you. What is it that you're really trying to accomplish right now? What is it that you're trying to be like? What is it you're trying to get to? And kind of like the what's missing question, what is it that's hindering you from fully getting there? Is there something I could help you work on? Maybe there's multiple pieces to this, but is there one piece of this that if we could really move this a little bit, it'd make everything else a little better for you? What's the goal? What's the obstacle? So when you're talking to someone who is in pain, who is crying, who's really upset, those are a few tips to kind of keep in mind as you go. A few things I would suggest. See what you think about this quote. Conflict is the price you pay for deepening intimacy. If you really want to be close to someone else, conflict is an inevitable part of what that will look like, because you are different people. You are not the same person. And in order to mesh and become like one person, conflict is the price you have to pay. Sometimes you are going to have to butt heads and sort it out, painful as it might be. Curious if you agree or disagree with that statement, and if you have a reason why. What do you think about that? Conflict is the price you pay for deepening intimacy. What has that been like for you? Interested in hearing from you if you'd like to make a comment or two. I'm going to keep moving, but if I get any comments on that, I will pause and talk about them. Conflict is the price you pay for deepening intimacy. I would mention, as you're thinking about that, typing on that, if you're just tuning in, we're here every Wednesday night. We've still got about another month to go on this relationship study. We'll have something else coming up after that, but would invite you to like our Facebook fan page, to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we're glad to have you tuning in every week and hope you find what we're doing here to be beneficial. But every Wednesday at 7 p.m. I'm live. If you miss it, you can always watch it later. It'll be stored and available both on Facebook and on YouTube. I thought this passage was interesting. Genesis chapter 32. This is when Jacob is wrestling with God, who shows up in like some human form. Like, it's a very mysterious passage. But they wrestle all night, and they're really getting into it, and it's pretty heated. And, Jacob ends up with a permanent limp after this, because I think he's got like this dislocated leg, if I'm remembering correctly. But this quote is one that stays with me. If you're going to have to get into an argument, if you're really going to get into a scuffle, it says, "Then the man said, 'Let me go, for it is daybreak.'" This is the Lord embodied who is speaking. "Let me go. The sun is rising. I got to get out of here. Let me go." And Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." That has become for me one of those verses that I think you can apply it to so many different areas. Certainly to, for example, when you're doing a heavy level of research and you got all this content, all these materials, and it's like, where is all this going? I say, I'm just going to keep processing, keep engaging until I walk out of this with something. There's going to be some kernel, some nugget that rises to the surface. I will not let this go until it blesses me. But I think that might be an okay way to think about when you're in a period of conflict and struggle and wrestling. Even as you do it, you keep hanging on to each other. Like, there's still a loving bond there that, okay, we're engaging. Maybe we even have to take a breather for a few minutes and then talk again, but we're not going to stop this until we come out of this with some blessing, right? And that blessing might be better knowledge of my partner. It might be a better solution to the issue. It might be a fresh perspective on myself or our life together. But to say, I'm not backing out of this until we create something positive from this thing that's frustrating us. Great. Got a couple of comments coming in. Randall says, "You avoid conflict if you don't really care about that person because you wouldn't mind if they weren't in your life." Yeah, so that's helpful, Randall. Part of conflict with people is a way of saying, in my world, you have some importance. This is something I try to encourage my friends in ministry with, that really anybody who's in a position of leadership anywhere. It's not just for church leadership, but anytime someone is criticizing you, it hurts to be criticized, but underneath the criticism, the silver lining is you are important enough in that person's life that they're thinking about you, even if you're not around, and your actions are making an impact on them. So for better or worse, criticism is one way of saying you kind of matter in my life. You have significance in my life. But yeah, you're exactly right. If you don't care about someone, you might choose not to engage. And that's one reason to avoid conflict with certain people, right? Like there are certain people in your life where you say, I've tried with this person. It just isn't worth it. There's not really anything I'm trying to get out of this being some sort of friendship or relationship. So don't have any malice. Don't wish them any bad, but I'm just not going to engage that person anymore. But yeah, that is what that's saying. I wouldn't mind if you weren't in my life. Okay, good. I've got several comments coming in here. Whitney says, I have no problem being confrontational, and I want to work through until the end naturally. William is more passive. I agree with the quote, and it's definitely why I'd much rather talk about something than let it pass and tiptoe around it. We're always better after talking through an issue, even if it's painful to talk about. So the challenge for, actually to a large extent for males, Whitney, males have a harder time engaging in tense conversations. We were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. We do get overwhelmed more easily, but definitely good to say, hey, we do need to talk about such and such. Right now, you may need a couple of minutes to cool off. Maybe you just got home. You want to take 15 minutes and sit on the couch or clear your mind. But, what's a time that we can talk about this and work on this? And despite the fact that we introverts may be resistant to it, you're exactly right. It's better for both of us to get it out on the table. And something I tell people a lot in premarital counseling is the only real problems in your relationship are the ones you can't or won't talk about. As long as you're talking about it, you're moving towards a solution. As long as you're talking about it, you're at least staying engaged with each other. But it's the things you can't or won't talk about that are the real problems. True in family life, also true in church life. Whatever it is we refuse to talk about, the elephant in the room, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, the things you won't talk about that both of you know are there, that's the real problem. So thank you for sharing that, Whitney. Yeah, that's a good comment and a good thought. Sandy says, I think a lot of people believe when they marry that they have a lot in common, but as you live together and learn more about each other, it can become apparent that you aren't as much alike as you thought, and that can result in conflict. And that's exactly right. In getting to know each other, some conflict is the price of deeper intimacy. And I do think it's true. There are some couples who just really don't have that much conflict, but most of us have some level of it. I know when we were in college at Harding, a lot of our friends got married pretty quickly. Like I'm talking, before they were graduated from college, they would get married. And Carolina and I got married after we graduated. We had dated, I think, 3.5 years from the time we started dating until we were married. We had some friends who dated and got married in less than a year. And I remember our friends telling us, they were talking to us one time, man, don't you just remember those first couple of years fighting like cats and dogs? And I was thinking, we argued some while we dated, but by the time we married, we'd gotten to know each other where we kind of got through some of that. But I think for the ones that were getting together quicker, they were discovering a little more of what you were talking about, Sandy, that, oh, I thought we had everything in common. And all of a sudden, oh, wow, there was a lot on the table here that we hadn't really anticipated or dealt with yet. So part of the value of premarital counseling, it's good to get stuff out on the table. Minor issues might be better ignored. Don't win the battle and lose the war. This is also good, Randall. A lot of stuff really isn't that important. The benefit of talking, listening, empathizing, rooting for each other, if you can avoid the nasty conflict, that's desirable. I'll also add, talking about William, he's very good talking through things. William is very even keel, isn't he? Yeah, William, I have a hard time picturing William getting really hot and bothered about anything. He's pretty chill, and yes, good person to talk to. Let's see, Randall's saying, I should have said you should compromise on minor issues, not that they should be completely ignored. Kind of depends on the issue, doesn't it, Randall? Like there are certain things it's just not worth engaging on. But a lot of things, yeah, we could find a way. Okay, this is important to you. This is important to me. How do I get you some of what you want where I also get some of what I want? That's important. All right. Let me keep moving here. I would say if you are needing to have a hard conversation, don't run from it. It is easy to forget that the person you are talking to is not your adversary. If this is a person who you are married to, this is someone who is committed their life to your life. Their future is now tied to your future. Your well being has everything to do with their well being. It is worth engaging with a person like that because so much is at stake for both of you. And so, running from strife or telling yourself in your head, oh, no, no, like this is going to be terrible. They're going to be out to get me or against me. It's like a lot of times your partner, especially if you say, hey, I need to bring this up and it's hard for me to talk about it, but can we talk about it? A lot of us want to be reasonable and we want to be kind to the person we're with. So don't run from strife. Just because strife is there doesn't mean anything's wrong with your relationship or your marriage. It is wise, however, to choose your battles carefully. Just because something bothers you doesn't mean you have to bring it up every single time. It doesn't mean that you have to expect your spouse, your partner to like always toe the line on everything exactly the way you want it. Like people need their space to be themselves. I've again, some of this has to do with being in a position of having the luxury of having space in your home, but I think it's important to have some spaces where I've got a space in my house where I'm doing this broadcast right now. I don't know what to call this room. I say it's kind of like I'll call it like my study office slash man cave slash guitar music room, but I've got a little space in the house where I keep all my stuff, and this is actually where I do all my study and I compose my sermons, and I like to listen to music, and but this is like my little space that I've been able to kind of make everything the way that I want it. And I'm certain that if Carolina had this as one of her spaces, she would do things differently. And, she's got a little office space that she gets to have things the way she wants. It's good for both of you to have some place to be yourself and do things the way you want. Again, I recognize not everyone is in a position where they've got that kind of extra space, but it's good to have some space for each of you to be yourself. And I think a lot of that helps with what is it that we're going to choose to argue about. Does this have bigger long-term implications for us? Do I really see some danger in us not taking a different course of action? A lot of times I will ask people like, okay, here's the thing you're kind of arguing about. What if nothing changes? Like, what does that mean for you both? Like, what are the real implications of this? But not that there aren't some battles worth choosing, but we should choose them thoughtfully and carefully. Yes, don't waste your authority on minor details that won't matter by next week. Save your authority for more important issues. Yeah, both of you should have a say in the relationship and in your life together. But yeah, if it's stuff that is just going to go away, and for me, the biggest thing is always the problem with being hangry. If you know that term, if you get, once I get hungry, I pretty quickly get angry, and most of my life's problems can be solved by like some comfort food and a chocolate chip cookie. And if I've had a chocolate chip cookie, I have a hard time being in a bad mood about anything. So yeah, be thoughtful about what you choose to engage on. I'm also interested in this because we are shaped a lot by our upbringing. If you were to reflect on your parents, this is something that we would look at like in premarital counseling. You would look at your parents and say, how was conflict handled in your family? How was conflict handled in my family? But what was the typical way that your family deals with things that are uncomfortable? I got to say that my mom's extended family, which is very vast, and my dad's family are quite different. My dad's family, not that we never engage on uncomfortable topics, but there's a lot more tendency on my dad's side not to talk about things that are uncomfortable, is what I've seen. But in my mom's side of the family, everybody would kind of always get in everybody else's business. And whatever our immediate family was like, I'm sure it was some combination of the two of those. But it does make a difference in especially how your parents deal with their conflicts. I'm curious too. I would imagine some of you had the experience of growing up where perhaps your parents, like, you never got to witness your parents argue. I don't pretend to know all things about all things. Something I've encountered that has kind of stuck with me is, on the one hand, you don't want your children to have to deal with certain things that are kind of beyond them or too heavy for them, or just to see you being really negative. Like, you don't want them to have to experience that. But I also think it's not really a good thing for your children to have never witnessed their parents have a significant point of disagreement and then work that out together. Like, that's one of the things you need to do for your children, is that they need to be able to learn how to resolve conflict with their spouse by watching you and how you resolve the conflict with your spouse. They need to see the exchange. They need to see the genuine feelings, emotions, the bids for connection, the empathy, the listening, like whatever it is that happens. I'm of the opinion currently, and again, I know everyone's got opinions on this, but I'm of the opinion that while you don't want your house to just be a war zone, occasionally having some disagreement and working through it, and even letting your children see that happen, not entirely a negative thing for their development and upbringing. But I am curious if you have any thoughts on that. What did you learn from how your parents handled conflicts? How did that impact you, influence you? Curious if you have any thoughts on that. If you're going to argue, if you decide this is a battle that we need to have, one of the things that's important is to define the issue clearly. Okay, right now my emotions are running high, but this is the topic that I'm really bothered by. And so the language you don't want to use when you're trying to have a heated discussion is, well, there's this, and I'll tell you another thing. And then you bring up something that's unrelated. It's like, well, I'm mad at you about the dishes, and also, come to think of it, you don't do anything in the yard, you don't help with this, that kind of stuff. It's just a pile on, and it's negative, and it doesn't, like, at that point, it's like, do you really want to solve it, or are you just wanting to fuss about things? So it's important when you're going to engage in a negative or heated conversation, you want to actually define, okay, this is the thing, and maybe we both feel strongly about it, but I'm going to hear you out, but let's talk about this. And if you start chasing the rabbit trail, say, okay, later, if we need to have a conversation about yard work, we'll talk about yard work. Right now, we're talking about laundry. Let's stick with the laundry, and let's solve the laundry thing. But define your issue clearly. Stay focused on that issue. That's enough for any particular discussion. Yes, arguments could replace authority in my previous statement. Thank you, Gene. Let's see. So defining the issue clearly. Also important to give up put downs. Some people enjoy put down humor where you are trying to like belittle the other person as a way. I don't know. It's never a good thing if the point of your humor is to make your spouse like less in other people's eyes and make yourself greater. When you are connected so meaningfully to another person, like you can't harm them without also harming yourself. And ultimately by blessing them, you bless yourself. So put downs, just not useful, just general insults, demeaning, resentment. We've talked about some of the four horsemen in previous weeks, but here's a few things that you should do. So give up the put downs. Don't do put downs, but try actively to greet each other with an acknowledgement and warm hello, and mark leaving with a tender goodbye. It should be the case that you try to always treat the people in your life as if you're actually happy to see them. I know this is true for spouses. I think it's just as true for children. If you want your child not to be overly rebellious against you, like when you walk in the room and they're there, do you just go right on the rant about whatever they didn't do that's irritated you? Or do you talk to your children as if you actually like them? It matters. It matters. You want to greet each other warmly, say hello. When you say goodbye, Try to always say your goodbyes as if they matter. You never know. I mean, I know that's a cliche thing to say, but you never really know what goodbye will be your final goodbye. So treat them all as if they matter. But greetings and farewells are important. Appreciate your partner's help, and this is key. Appreciate what your partner does, but do it without expressing what doesn't meet your approval. So the correct way is to say, thank you for helping to clean up the kitchen. The incorrect way is to say, hey, you missed a spot, right? So appreciate the other person's help. And when you're going to appreciate them, don't follow it immediately with, and here's all the ways you could have done it better. Or here's the other things I wish you would have done. Or even worse, don't appreciate anything they do and just point out the things they didn't do. Nothing demotivates like that sort of thing. But always appreciate your partner's help. Try to appreciate them genuinely. And I've been talking a lot about creating spaces. Again, how do we, when we're going to have heated discussions and conflicts, how do we surround every other part of our life in such a way that those don't have to get so bad? You got to have some spaces that are going to be reserved as pleasant spaces. Sharing meals together is a great way to do that, but also insisting that when we're eating together, we don't bring phones to the table. We're not going to argue over dinner when we're eating together, even if we're mad at each other or even if something else happened that's frustrating. This is going to be a zone where we care for each other, we take an interest in each other. Maybe we share funny stories, but easier to do that with food too, right? Like if you're hungry, that's a little harder, but if everybody's getting their belly full and you're kind of winding down from the day, meal times, I would suggest, is a good time to try and connect with each other, but make some spaces in your life where you've just got an agreement. When we're doing this, this is just not the place that we're gonna have arguments. The goal, again, whatever it is that you are having a disagreement about, the ultimate goal is that when we walk away, remember that statement from Jacob, I won't let you go until you bless me. We want to end by turning toward each other rather than turning away from each other. Stonewalling was one of the worst of the four horsemen. So you've got the other stuff that kind of leads to stonewalling, where you just completely are turned away and giving each other the silent treatment. Stonewalling is especially bad. So the goal, whenever we have to have a disagreement, we are going to stay engaged. We're going to keep, even if we have to take a break and then reconnect, whatever it takes, we're going to keep making those bids to reconnect. We're going to find a solution together. We're going to collaborate, and we are going to somehow end turning toward each other rather than turning away from each other. That's the ultimate goal, and whatever it is a heated discussion. All right, so as always, if you found any of this content useful, I would be happy and thrilled for you to share this video clip. You can hit the share button on Facebook. You can copy and paste the link from YouTube. Glad to have you share this content. Would appreciate it if you give us the like button, like our fan page, subscribe to our YouTube channel. And again, if you want to get those text message notifications from me on Wednesdays a few minutes before class, just so you remember to log in, rmb.at/Casey Midweek. At the very beginning of the comments for tonight, I typed out that link, and hopefully that link works. But yeah, go there, and would be glad to have you get on my list. I promise not to harass you with a bunch of irrelevant stuff. We try to keep it pretty much on topic with the text message reminders. As always, if you have any questions about anything, anything at all, I'm glad to hear from you. If you have thoughts about class topics you wish I would talk about, something you wish I would explore further, even if you just want to disagree with me on some stuff, I'm happy to have you engage me. My email address is listed here on the screen, mark@kingscrossingcoc.com, and yeah, whatever you got, send it my way. I'm happy to hear from you. All right, well, I'm going to wrap us up with a word of prayer, and you guys have a great rest of your night. God, we thank you for all the blessings that we experience. We know that all of these come from you. Father, we know sometimes conflict is a necessary component of unity, where part of how we really know we're connected to another person is that we discover our differences, and yet we choose to show love and to find a way to be together. And Father, we know that you desire this in your church, and especially in our marriages, that in our families we find ways to mirror your mysterious, amazing love. And so help us in that pursuit, Father. Thank you for the time we've had here tonight, and continue to bless each of us. All these things I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.